joins us. Amita Baig is a heritage management consultant and represents World Monument Fund, a private not-for-profit organization in New York, US, which supports major conservation of heritage in India. She has worked extensively with the government and non-government sectors, developing strategies to protect and conserve India's heritage for over 3 decades in India and the Asian region. She worked with with Intact at its inception and has written extensively on the challenges of preserving India's heritage. She is also the author of Forts and Palaces of India. And this book is what we will be talking about today, The Multiple Narratives of the Taj Mahal, co-authored by Amita and Rahul Mehrotra. Oh, hi Amita, how are you?
Hi, very well indeed. Nice to see you, Rana.
Yes, same here. And I thought till you're coming, so I gave an introduction of your book and yourself and the work that you've been doing. Such wonderful work.
Thank you, Rana.
And before we start a conversation with Amita on the Taj Mahal, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit before that, a little bit about the Taj Mahal. So this is a verse that I like a lot, so I'll read it out. ये मैं नहीं निगाहे तवारीख कह रही पत्थर का एक बहिश्त यहीं आगरा में है. This is written by Abhishek Shukla and it means it's not me but the gaze of history that says this. There's a paradise of stone in Agra for all to witness. And this has been called by various names by various people, including a teardrop on the cheek of time by Rabindranath Tagore. And before we reach the Taj Mahal, there is a history of Mumtaz Mahal in Burhanpur. On the 16th and the 17th night of 1631, June 1631, Mumtaz Mahal left this world after the birth of her daughter Gohar Ara, and a grief-stricken Shah Jahan then decided to commemorate her memory. And Burhanpur was initially, they thought they would do something. She was buried in Burhanpur in the Ahu Khana, but they could not construct the kind of tomb that he wanted to, or the mausoleum that he wanted to, because the logistics of bringing the marble from Rajasthan as well as the sand quality and the quality on the banks of the Tapti were not conducive to building the kind of massive structure that he wanted. And the chronogram that was taken out, chronogram is a date, the Arabic date, Hijri date, which is taken out in the form of a verse. That was Jai Mumtaz Mahal Janatabad. May the abode of Mumtaz Mahal be paradise. So although Bebadal Khan was referring to heaven, a grieving husband decided to make her resting place a heaven too. And as the official poet laureate of Shah Jahan, Abu Talib Kalim Kashani writes, upon her grave may it be illuminated until the day of resurrection. The kings of kings constructed such an edifice that since destiny drew the plan of creation, it has not seen such an exalted building. This is a translation by Ebakok. And now we come to this wonderful book. It's one of the best books I've read on the Taj, and I've got a lot of books on the Taj Mahal. So when you talk of multiple narratives, you really take us through the whole, how it has been conceived and how it has, the changes that took place in it and the perception over the years, not just the conception, but the perception. So, and you talk about the religious and the secular aspect of the Taj Mahal. So can you just take our viewers through that?
Yeah.
And first of all, why
you
wrote this book also?
Thank you for your very generous introduction. I'm very overwhelmed by you saying that. I think to me, the Taj Mahal, which I have now seen for 35 years, each time I go, and I won't even begin to count how many times, it still has that overwhelming meaning. But the first time Rahul Mehrotra and I went, which was close on 20 years ago, when we went together, and there was a huge crowd, and he stepped away and he said that, you know, Amita, to see this for the first time, it's a sacred moment. And that somehow influenced forever the way we approached it in our work. And the other major influence was about 10 years after that, 12 years after that, we were leaving the Taj from the Fatehpuri gate side, which is where the domestic, you know, in this extraordinary, in democratic India, the domestic travelers come on one side and the foreigners arrive at the other. We were overwhelmed by the number of people standing in the middle of the heat in summer, waiting, sometimes 3-4 hours. We spoke to the security guard. He said it's as much as 4 or 5 hours that some of them wait.
Yes.
To enter the Taj, not for the reasons the tourists enter, but this is actually paying obeisance to your forefathers. It is trans faith. The people come maybe on their way back from Mathura, they may be on their way back from Ajmer. It is trans faith. It is deeply ingrained in our Indian psyche to be profoundly respectful of our forefathers. It doesn't matter what religion you are. And I think that was an overwhelming moment of how we approached the book as well. And so, because of course we had the luxury of spending so much time in the Taj, what hung the peg of the book actually was the north wall. This is the most richly embellished wall of the exterior wall of the Taj Mahal. It's engraved, it's inlaid, it's absolutely beautiful. It was restored during the time we worked there. And Shah Jahan only ever approached the Taj by river. And that, of course, then was his perceptual vision of the Taj Mahal. There was no question of him driving through the streets of Agra, that he couldn't draw out his elephant Mercedes and say, you know, I'm off to the Taj, because there's a lovely record of his visiting his father-in-law Asif Khan's house, and the road had to be covered with velvet and carpets and covered in ashrafis for him to go. So walking around Agra was not the emperor's option. He traveled by river. And then the other clue was, I had the great luxury of spending hours and hours and hours in the ASI archives. I found the 1933 photograph of the Taj being cleared up after the floods, and we found the doorway and the steps which Shah Jahan used to enter the crypt. We had actually been into the underground passages, which are beautifully painted. And they are now, of course, nobody can see them. That is the entrance to the crypt where Mumtaz Mahal was buried, and eventually Shah Jahan as well. So that was his perception, and that is really, when we began to read the Taj Mahal, we began to read it as, how would he have seen it? The emperor clearly decided that, you know, this was Jannat. That is unequivocal. The surahs over the 4 pishtaks unequivocally are the call to enter thou my paradise, in translation, but it is enter into Jannat. That is, and we read all the data. He saw the building of the Taj Mahal, to my mind, as the edge of, as his aspiration to Jannat, perhaps a permanent view. But if you look at the Mehtab Bagh on the other side of the river and the Taj, they are mirror images of each other. So did he, as is said in the Quran, where you would, Jannat will have a free-flowing river, freshwater river, and in those days, of course, the Jamna was this wonderful fresh, was the melting snows of the Himalayas. It was absolutely brilliant. For the emperor to appropriate the river, well, he had Hindustan, he had the river too. Therefore, you begin to read this extraordinary monument which is reflected all the time in the river. At the time when the river flowed at its edge, always was this the axis mundi. The monument is built in perfect cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. The river flows west to east over here. Mehtab Bagh continues that absolute clear line of sight, clear axis. It's cosmological, it's cardinal directions. Every element that is stated is tried allegorically to be presented in this site, is how we read it. So if one sees the river as the center of his grand design, then you would always be able to see the Taj, see Jannat ephemerally. You could not touch it. It was not actually there. It was part of the... It has that element of the other world. Of you can see it but not touch it. And then remember that only Shah Jahan and his family ever entered the mausoleum. Not even the nobility. The nobility could enter the lower level platform where the mosque and the Mehman Khana, Jamaat Khana is. And on the higher level, there was only Shah Jahan, the priests, the Hafiz who read the prayers round the clock, and the queens. So it was clearly where only he could go. Within there are multiple metaphors as well. The whole place is alive with the metaphors of paradise permanently. It's not just in the garden. Is the interior of the Taj Mahal with this incredible floral inlay. Is it paradise in permanence? Because fruit would be everlasting in the Quran. Are the flowers too everlasting? They are in perpetual mourning. And then it just goes on. I mean, every way you read it, in his eyes, this was his most sacred representation. What becomes a little uncomfortable in all this is suddenly the mausoleum is built in 12 years. The garden is set, the outer walls. I mean, in the book where we found research where the outer walls were built at the same time as the north wall on the river, because the enclosed space of the Paradise Garden and Mehtab Bagh happened all simultaneously. Why did he get up in the middle of all this and go to Delhi and start building Shah Jahanabad? What went wrong? Because there was this industrial enterprise. I mean, his entire empire's resources were practically going into this. And he up sticks with Amanat Khan and Makramat, and off he goes. Shah Jahanabad is now being built. And of course, over time, the most telling moment, of course, was when the peacocks were moved to Delhi. And then the nobility left. So there is this incredible sacred space. Was he overwhelmed? I mean, there's this wonderful description of this guava-shaped, heaven-reaching dome. That would have been exposed in 12 years. So was this the moment at which he decided, enough, I'm going?
That is, yes, indeed, a very, very interesting question, that why did he leave it and go? But to come back to the Taj, today it's become, it's just seen as a symbol of love. There are people who are just, it's become a voyeuristic experience instead of the sacred experience that you have just described. And you also in your book, and that was the first time I realized that. In fact, when I was a teenager, I think 15 or 16 years old, my father was posted in Agra, and we were living in the Circuit House Annexe, which is just next door to the Taj. So our evening walks for a year were inside the Taj, and we would be in and out all the time. So, and at that time, the Mehtab Bagh had not been, excavated, I should say, or, had not been discovered. It was under those layers of sand and silt. So the fact that there is a sacred space and there is a secular space. That is the first time Sarthak Mehrotra introduced me to it, and he said, you must read Amita ma'am's book. And then, in fact, he gave me his copy, and then later on I bought mine. So can you just tell us about that, the where the secular space and where the religious space starts, and why did he make a differentiation between the secular and the religious? Because today the whole thing is secular. Nobody ever, I don't think anybody understands that the mausoleum itself, and once you enter the gate from where the calligraphy starts, that's where the religious space or the Rawza-e Munawwara started. Today it's just Taj Mahal all over, whether it is Taj Ganj or even the Oberoi Hotel or the Taj, which are. So can you just walk us through that?
Let me walk you through it from the north wall,
Yes.
from the river,
Okay.
from his entrance.
Yes.
So he only entered and came upstairs in the mausoleum. Purity of white, set in this incredible paradisical garden, surrounded by these enormous red walls and the mosques on either side, the mosque and the Jamaat Khana, and then the other buildings. It's you know, the perfect yin yang of buildings on either side, the duality. The allegories run up throughout the building. You could read it everywhere. The sacred space was clearly the Takht. Okay, so he and the nobility were able to enter the Takht, the mosque, and the Jamaat Khana alongside. The public came to the Jalal Khana, which is before what we today call the main gate. And they were only ever allowed on the veranda level. They could not go down into the garden. So you would be able to view the Taj Mahal as an ordinary janta, basically through the trees at a distance, untouchable, unreachable. Whereas in the mausoleum, the emperor and God were merging. They were becoming one. His aspiration, possibly that great sense of aggrandizement where he didn't actually perceptionally separate it. And certainly Lahori's records definitely does not separate it. And of course, court records are very flowery and obsequious, so that aggrandizement happens. But his view and his destination was the mausoleum. And this was the sacred space. So if you go across the river to Mehtab Baig on the other side, that is the pleasure garden. It's the Moonlight Garden with baradaris and pavilions and this great octagonal pond where once again you would be enticed by the reflection of the Taj. But for the common man, it was unreachable. It was that huge dome in the distance. You know, once we were walking in the city, and we just caught a glimpse of the dome, and I remember Rahul saying to me, he said, can you imagine in the darkness of the 16th, 17th century, seeing that dome rise out? I mean, it was heaven reaching. So the sacredness of it was, I think, just, and the closed access of it, only the ulema, the hafiz, there were prayers read around the clock. The hafiz stayed in the outer chambers. Only the royal family could go around the actual sarcophagus. It was fully furnished. They had gold orb lights, and the women came at night to pray and the men prayed in the day. So the whole ritual and understanding of how they used it and related with it was profoundly sacred. And you and I would have seen it at this great distance, maybe through the fruit trees and with a little fragrance of the jasmine under our noses. Because that beyond the Jalal Khana is this immense bazaar, because everybody who wanted darshan of the emperor had to visit and see what he had created. So the great bazaar with sarais came up, and it was the marketplace. But why did he move so far away from Agra? And I think, one, it was the pride of place. He came far enough away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Two, he found a perfect alignment to create this. It is absolutely faultless in its location, in its inspiration, and in its execution. Except, as we discussed earlier, in this one pillar which you see on the side of the Taj Mahal, which faces the mosque, there is an infinitesimal fault because only Allah is perfect.
So that's
And that is
another.
embedded permanently in the building.
Yes. That's such a beautiful aspect of the whole building. Before that, Sarthak is here. He's saying, "Hi, the whole space is still sacred to for a lot of people working in and living around it." And I've been wanting to go and see the Taj with Sarthak. Hopefully, one day, inshallah. And this fact, that yes, both of us have to go. And this fact that you talk about, that only Allah is perfect, and then you have given a picture, photograph of that imperfection in your book also, as well as the entrance. That is, again, I saw it for the first time. I knew there was the entrance that he used to come by the river, the emperor, but it is only in your book that I saw a photograph of that entrance. So that again is another very big reason to buy this book for people who are watching. And somebody was asking, the name of the book is The Multiple Narratives of the Taj Mahal. So now we've already talked about that only Allah is perfect. But apart from that, pretty much the second perfection would be the Taj Mahal. So can you just tell us about the craftsmanship, the embossers, the Parchinkari, all this, the people who were collected from all over Central Asia and India to create this piece of perfection. And Fanny Pack Parks has counted that there were 52 slivers of, I think, coral or something in one flower.
Agate, yeah.
So can you, agate, okay. So can you just describe the
Cornelian,
perfection?
I think she said Cornelian. Yes,
Cornelian, yes, Cornelian, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was an industrial undertaking. When you consider the journey from Makrana to Agra is 500 kilometers away. Bullock carts of Makrana had to come. So the choice of Makrana is because of the luminescence of the marble, hence the illumined tomb. The marble in different seasons, in the monsoon and at night, has a lovely, lovely quality of, it's not an opaque stone as you would buy today in the market in Delhi. It has this lovely luminescence. The scale of it, I mean, can you imagine how many tons of marble had to arrive? 22,000 karyagars sat from the point of cutting the stone that would clad the building, because the building itself is brick. There's these incredible foundations which are described in detail. I found wonderful records in the ASI, described in detail how these well foundations were built and how actually the northern wall was straightened to be in perfect east-west alignment. They actually, yes, that little bit of alteration was done. So there's the huge enterprise of building these foundation wells. But that was the system of construction in Agra, because now that the river has changed so much, it now today flows about 8 feet higher than, 7 or 8 feet higher than it did. You can see clearly the wells now are visible. You can see where the wood would have been lashed together and installed. So all that is very well recorded. But the speed at which it was done, and the, where they've got many extra wells along the waterfront and under the actual mausoleum, the weight load-bearing wells, and then it spreads out and thins out across the rest, under the rest of the takht. Then arrived these craftsmen to do the fine finishing. The calligrapher Zamanat Khan is of course famous, and he actually, it's the only inscription on the building of a name and a date. Makramat Ali was his head site supervisor, I guess. The Parchinkaris arrived from, the flower carvers came from Bukhara. The inlay workers, I must draw your attention, came from Kannauj. They were all Hindu. So there is this great melting pot of culture. I would imagine they came from all over India with the special skills. Bricks, the kind of bricks they needed. It was just Agra that produced that kind of, that had the right kind of clay. As also for the lime mortar, it was all available in Agra. It was the lapis which came from Afghanistan, the carnelian which probably came from beyond in Central Asia. Journeys that from around the world as this building scaled up. To me, what is extraordinary is the mass scale of the building. This absolutely infinitesimally fine carving that goes onto it.
Yeah.
When you talk of 52 pieces of carnelian in one flower, it's, you know, maybe 2 inches across.
Yes. I also
And
stood
when
in front of it mesmerized.
and you can see they show you the flowers which were not looted subsequently, and the luminescence, because each one of those pieces, those jewels, are about 1.5 to 2 inches thick. And you know, now of course they do, the restoration is with much thinner, still carnelian, but not 2.5 inches thick. We're not, it's no longer Shah Jahan doing this. So yeah, and then when you look at the railing around the sarcophagus, the flowers are in mourning. They're drooping down. I mean, the imagination of it, the perfection. So it's this massive scale and this tiny, minute detail that makes it the most extraordinary building.
And
20,000 people sitting there.
there's this beautiful comment by Naveen Piplani, who said that what is work for people like us, it is Shah ki ibadat for the artisans. And that, I think, is a beautiful comment to what you've just described as
Well, Naveen worked so long with us. We all had the same basic soul for the project.
it's beautiful. And that I love this comment. And before I go on, it seems that the building of the Taj was one of history's most collaborative projects. It's great to hear new stories and interpretations here. We'll be hearing a lot of interesting stories from Amita just now. And one of them is a slightly macabre also, because when I was working in Delhi, I came across this tomb of Kuli Khan, who was a foster brother of Akbar. And his tomb was bought by Thomas Metcalfe and converted into his summer palace. And he would give it on rent for honeymooners. And I still and the cenotaph was used as a dining table, according to one account I had read. So, you know, I found that distinctly a little morbid. Who would want to honeymoon inside a mausoleum? And that exactly is
Unko
what
kya
I heard.
jaane? What do they know?
Yes, and I read that something like this happened in the Taj Mahal also, and the ball that you described, that, you know, the people come in this great party that Sindhya throws for people in the Taj Mahal. So, you know, please describe that to us from the beginning of when the lights come up.
Well, you know, of course, I think post Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb more or less left Agra. He ruled India from the Deccan, which he was determined to conquer. And as we all know, the Mughal Empire then went into decline, and invasion after invasion, the wealth of the Mughal Empire was bled. And, you know, perhaps with good reason, since there was no one to take care of it. And of course, the Taj was looted and left to decay. At some point, Agra came under the rule of the Marathas, specifically the Sindhyas. And the British were also a great presence by then. They had occupied the fort. And as you know, the Sindhyas very quickly sought a relationship with the British, much faster than anyone else. Surajmal from Bharatpur just looted and left and went back to Bharatpur, but the Sindhyas sought this. So I have a wonderful section of description by Rousselet, a French traveler in Agra at the time, and he describes coming into a dinner party, a banquet at the Taj. And he walks through a narrow alleyway, which I imagine by then is the overgrown garden, because in his drawings the garden is completely over the pathway. And there's a dinner party, there's dancing, there's an orchestra, there is an incredible feast, all on the platform of the Taj. So the sacred was now truly the profane. It had gone. And once you have desecrated it by feasting on its platform, by orchestras and dancing, and there were fireworks, and he has such a, and he's actually aware that, you know, there is this maybe not quite right. But I don't think, I think possibly to the European mind at that time, the monument was more overwhelming than the fact that it was a sacred tomb. So that, and I think those times when at some point I think they also lived in the mosque in the Jamaat Khana. They didn't actually live in the mausoleum, but we found on the upper floor young soldiers have written their names in the glass. Vandalism is not an Indian thing. Well inherited. So there was quite a lot of vandalism. In fact, the first repairs of the Taj was done by an English engineer who was given enough money to replace the jeweled inlay, and he took the money home and put colored chunam in. And a couple of years later, it all washed away. So I think it's been, but then once it's become, once it loses that relationship, there's no description, of course, of what happened to the Hafiz there, because had the prayers stopped, had they left without patronage, without money, what had happened to them? But the ASI records a continuous tradition of khadims. I think the last khadim was employed directly in the Agra fort as recently as maybe 30 years ago. And those were inherited positions. And I'm sure they must have moved out of the Taj into the fort. But there is no record of what happened to the whole infrastructure that had been set up. Perhaps they just ran away with the multiple lootings of the Taj. So once it's looted and, you know, people take away bits of it, pull out, it loses it becomes a profane space.
That is something I always feel very sad about whenever I go to the Taj, that she cannot be resting in peace.
No.
That
and she had a pearl chadar that was stolen. So, you know, no, I don't think there's any resting in peace. For a long time, you could go down Nietzsche to the crypt and make your circumambulation come up. Now the numbers are so high. But to me, what remains sacred, as I was saying much earlier, is that moment of watching India's public, perhaps more the rural population than the urban, who are much more smart, the reverence with which they visit the grave. And that money that is thrown down is collected and handed back to the Waqf who manage the mosque. So, you know, it's a lovely, the Urs is still held in June every year. That is the beauty of India, actually, when we don't mess around with it. There are these wonderful traditions that is part of our syncretic culture.
I went to the Urs, I think 2 years ago, and it was just by chance. I had gone to visit the Taj, and I saw that there was a Urs inside. So, of course, I managed to go down, which I used to earlier. As I said, I lived there when I was much younger, as a teenager. I remember going down even that steps there on the first veranda. There are some steps going down. I remember going down those steps also in those days. I think now everything is locked.
The crypt is locked, yeah.
Yes. There is
but now I think you have to pay extra to go inside the mausoleum. It's a proposal we put to the ASI years ago. You have to pay extra because there is no way that mass of humanity can actually, the monument can't sustain it now.
That is a sensible idea. There's one question. Do we have a record what the later Mughals thought of the Taj? Who was responsible for its upkeep after after Shah Jahan?
Aurangzeb, certainly in his time, because there's this long letter he wrote to his father saying that the dome was damaged, etc. So, I mean, he cleared that it was repaired. Shah Jahan set up a whole mechanism where the revenue of X number of villages would come, and that money would go to paying for the prayers to go around the clock and the maintenance. We have records of the fruit in the garden being sold, and that was also to go towards the maintenance of the Taj. So, you know, paradise was also productive. So those records are there, but where that we don't have a record is where that relationship of the system of management set up by Shah Jahan, which was headed by the eunuch Aga Khan, to manage the Taj in perpetuity, I don't know. You know, it's as mysterious as what did Shah Jahan intend for himself. Why did he
And
not ever
today
have a
when
proper...
yes, and today when we go, we see all these manicured lawns and those cypress trees, which are now called Taj Mahal themselves. The trees are also called, I think, Taj Mahal. So, but that is not how it was conceived. It was conceived with flowering and fruit-bearing trees. As you just mentioned, the fruit was being sold. So can you tell us, and you have some beautiful pictures, paintings in your book where you show the transition also from those beautiful trees and, what should I say, a wild, a sense of what paradise should be, unrestrained. Today, it's a very, very restrained and a very structured lawn and garden, etc. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, you know, we know that after the decline of the Mughals and when the British set up a cantonment in Agra, the whole fabric of how you looked at tombs and monuments changed. But where it did change, at one level for the better and at another, perhaps in our cultural context for the worse, was with the arrival of Curzon. Curzon saw the amount of damage being done to the Taj. He saw people writing on its walls. He saw the desecration of the site, and he decided that this was the most superlative building he'd seen, and he set about putting it in order as only he knew how, which was apart from the restoration of the building, which went on. There was a whole reconstruction of the area around the Jalal Khana. All that was rebuilt because that had collapsed over the years. Was on either side of the Jalal Khana, the Khwaspuras, those ones, they were not inhabited, collapsed. So his cousin set about all this, and then he looked at the gardens and he thought, gosh, what a mess. It was the alleyway described in Rousselet's banquet evening. He cleared the unruly underbrush and planted an English garden because that
Yes.
was his concept of landscape. So gone was the paradise garden. He restored the water system, took out the terracotta pipes and they put cast iron pipes in, but once again the fountains worked and the water system worked. But the legibility and understanding of a Persian garden or a paradise garden was over forever. And now you see it no longer mystical through the trees and the plants.
Yes.
And it's now an in-your-face moment.
Yes.
Against
Yes.
the lawn. In all fairness, I must say that, you know, we did a whole experiment of restoring the paradise garden with Madhudola very recently. And it's been intensely planted up and it's very, very expensive. I don't think that Taj could ever, even if they wanted today, if one were to say that we are mature enough now to restore it to how it was intended to be, it's an extremely expensive exercise.
Another reason I was told for the trees was that the sand particles would get caught in it and prevent the pollution or the, what should I say, getting the marble polluted. So that was another reason for the trees. And I'm sure they must have had their reasons for planting trees like that.
In the original concept, you know it better than me, shade, fruit,
yes,
flowers, and water. So I think it was very much about shade because in the hot, dusty plains of India, of Agra, shade was a vital thing. I don't believe that there was dust and pollution in those days.
It wasn't that. So that is, okay. And one myth, the minute you go onto the Taj Mahal and you stand on the platform, the first thing every guide will tell you is about the Black Taj Mahal. You've just talked to us about Mehtab Bagh. Can you just please talk a little bit more about it? What the continuation of the Chahar Bagh into the Mehtab Bagh, which you just described as in perfect alignment and perfect cosmological alignment. So, and that there was no such thing as a Black Taj Mahal, which
No,
is a
no,
very,
no.
very popular myth.
It's a very popular myth because I think although the Mehtab Bagh was inundated very quickly, I think in Shah Jahan's own lifetime, Aurangzeb writes that the garden is ruined. It was a very, very well established garden, and the garden wall is exactly on alignment. So what was obviously seen in from the Taj across the river was possibly the outline of the front wall and perhaps the outline of the platform. The platform of the octagonal pond is exactly the same size as the platform of the Taj Mahal. The octagonal pond is also Harsht Bahisht, that's octagonal. And in the fountains, you would see once again the reflection of the Taj. But this was a pleasure garden. This was the Baradari. This was where you could arrive by boat and perhaps enjoy viewing the Taj at a distance. So the excavations took place in the 1990s. The ASI and the Smithsonian Institute came together and they excavated it. And the minute the octagonal pond was revealed, they knew the story was of Mehtab Bagh. And of course, it's spoken of so clearly in Aurangzeb's letter and of course with Lahori as well. So, and there we were involved in some excavations about 5 or 6 years ago. The bases of the Baradaris are all there. What happened also, I think, is for the British, when they arrived, and the British writers, they of course have to see everything in black and white and very rationally. Why would the only thing off center in the Taj Mahal is Shah Jahan's grave? Why would he not conceive of his own? There must have been a Black Taj because we can see the outline on the other side. But never imagining, that, of course, that the river was the axis mundi.
Oh, yes.
And you had the pleasure garden on one side and Jannat on the other.
Such a beautiful description you've given us. Beautiful. I'm really enjoying this conversation, even after having read your book. Just talking to you and hearing you, it's such a pleasure, Amita. And
so
now
one little detail I feel I must share with you, especially since I see Naveen is also on the watching. The really exciting discovery we all made together was on the flooring of the Jamaat Khana, when we found the sketch plan of the roof. And it's a rough drawing just straight through the sandstone flooring.
Yeah.
With Urdu mein likhawat bhi hai, yeah, probably Persian. So you could see that by line of sight, they were adjusting the curvature of the dome. I mean, you know, oh my God, we went running to the airside. So don't let anyone ever walk on this again. It took a little while, but they've now barricaded it off. But there is the drawing of the dome on the floor of the Jamaat Khana. That was a great multiple narrative. Okay, so let me give you one other thing. There's famous thing that goes in Agra, Mason marks, where you see all these marks on the sandstone. It's in Fatehpur Sikri and it's everywhere. So, of course, it's in, and it's as much in, say, Bhojpur temple as it is in the Taj Mahal or Fatehpur Sikri. So it's an Indian, continuous Indian living tradition. And you see it throughout the walkways of the Taj. You can see the guild marks and the Thekedar's name is written on the riser and the guild marks are on the flat. Never do you see it in the marble.
Yes.
Never do you see it in the marble. Now, Yahan na Salim Chisti's tomb, do you ever see anybody ruining the marble? Or profaning the marble by putting your name on it?
2 years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I had gone and I just went on a search for the Mason marks. And I discovered Mason marks in places I would never have thought, and I must have walked on them so many times. And then it's only when you're looking for it that you manage to see it. And such beautiful designs.
Yeah. And then you look at the names on the risers, there are the names. And on the flat, there is the guild mark.
Yes.
And so, you know, clearly the Thekadar could write his name, but the Karyagar, although skilled, couldn't write their names. Highly skilled to do what they did.
So they and Amanat Khan, they're the only ones who managed to sign their names. So
Yes.
that and that is something really, and I keep thinking of Sahir Ludhianvi ke mere mehboob kahi aur mila kar mujhse, but even then the Masons have left their mark there, जिसको कहते हैं ना
Yes.
कि तेरी
Yeah.
सन्नाई ने इसको बख्शा होगा अक्से जमील, so वो छोड़ तो गए अपना निशान.
छोड़ तो गए,
और
हाँ.
हाँ, और अब हमारे पास शायद we have just 10 minutes left. Can you just tell us why it is so important to conserve the Taj Mahal, and what other steps that are being taken, and what further steps can be taken?
You know, I'm convinced, and I've been immersed in it now for all my working career.
Yes.
Taj Mahal will always be restored to the maximum level of excellence that they can achieve. And yeah, of course, there were many writers in the 50s and 60s who wrote very critical things. But I think we're clear now in the 2020, the ASI is very, very cognizant of ensuring that only the best will happen. And I think for anybody else, it would be the most foolhardy thing to do is to touch the Mausoleum. There's just how we approach it. I was looking at photographs of the CA in charge of the Taj we worked with for years, a wonderful man called Munazar Ali. And culturally, they have to repair and fix and grout the dome. Not one man went with his shoes on. And that is our culture. So, yeah, I think they will do it. I mean, there's a bit of the railing that blew off the other day. They'll get Makrana marble and they will find the Karyagar and they will repair it. It's a very expensive exercise. I think the Mausoleum is there in its entirety. I think, it would be wonderful to see the original water system come back. That would be really beautiful. And perhaps, I know that to do a more intense planting is extremely expensive, so it may not work. But perhaps with the pollution the way it is now, they may need to do it. But the other thing that I think served Agra very badly, but served the Taj very well, was the Supreme Court order to have a 500-meter no development zone around the Taj. At the time, I was one of the critics who said that the value of the Taj was over that of the citizens of Agra. But today, when you look at the pressures that have come upon our cities, just in 25 years since the judgment, you think, thank God they were so far-sighted to ensure that this unprecedented 500-meter boundary secures the site.
Seema is asking, where are the present Karigars from?
Agra. Sab wahi hai. And they are all registered with the Taj, with the Agra ASI. They have the Karyagars right there.
I visited the house of one of the master Karigars in Tajganj and spent the whole day with them, seeing how they do their work. It was, it's quite an experience to go and see that, how they do.
And I think there's also, that's probably the survival of the craft. The stone blocks are cut now by machine, but they're hand finished. So the stones that are being put back in where they're replacing the main pathway, the block is machine cut and brought to site, and then they hand finish with the chamfering that is necessary to fit these. So, and they make their lime right there at site.
Okay. There are some questions. I think we can answer them later. Somebody has asked, was the second raised platform borrowed feature of Hindu architecture? First of all, there is no such thing as Hindu and Muslim architecture. Architecture is secular, but I'm sure Amita can tell us about the raised platform.
See, all our sacred monuments, sacred sites are raised. Bhagwan is, whether it's Bhagwan or Allah or Takht or no Takht, it is one step above where you walk. That is across India.
That's a beautiful explanation. Was the Taj Mahal ever lit at night with mashals or any other way in the olden days?
In the olden days, there's a very clear description of having golden orb lights inside the railing around the sarcophagus. When the royal women came to pray, there would have been lights, but they would have been very discreet lights, and they were only visible to the royal princesses. But mashals per se, no. I mean, I'm not sure of any evidence. Curzon put in an Egyptian light he brought from Cairo so that the mausoleum would be lit. So that's his layer of history on it.
So just tell us some more anecdotes, and because you worked there for so long now, none of us are as lucky as to be able to get so much access to it. So talk us through some more of your experiences when you were researching it. Just as you just told us about the drawing of the the curvature of the dome. So things like that. What you discovered there on the first floor, or while you were working on it.
Well, gosh, I think what astonishes me, and even after writing the book, you go back and every time there's something new that you see. When you go to the Taj next time and you look at the corners, the chamfered corners, and there's a zigzag pattern that defines those corners. And when you look up, it really looks like it's cut that way. It looks like it's zigzag and not that it's a pattern. It's a chevron pattern. It's a chevron pattern, but it has an incredible feeling. You feel that the pillar is zigzagged, but it's just line of sight. And the other thing is, if you're there at dawn and you're standing on the east side and you look up above the Pishtar, the original jewels are, all the inlay at the upper levels is original. The way it lights up with the dawn is magic. It's the only reason to get to the Taj before sunrise is to sit on the eastern side and watch the jewels light up. I mean, in its day, it must have been magical. And then
So I think I'm going to go as soon as this whole COVID situation is over. Inshallah, we are going to go there and sit and look at it. I want to see it through your eyes.
Oh, I'd love to do that with you. I would learn so much from you. When did common people start going inside the mausoleum? I think we went through a grey period of Mughal history after the fall of Aurangzeb. We went through 100 grey years when there was Lutmar, and then I think it was a free-for-all until Curzon's time, and he began to we have to be very grateful that 100 years ago he set in place systems which are serving us today to ensure. So I imagine Janta went inside the mausoleum somewhere around 1750.
I think
the East India Company started occupying Agra, and they took what they wanted.
Naveen has a very interesting question. What would be Anita's vision for Taj Mahal and the Taj Ganj if she was the DGASI? And that would be wonderful. I would love that.
Oh gosh, I would love to be able to bring back so many parts of the Taj and tell its story. These stories are so rich, and you have so much technology available to you today, and we need to tell them. The development of the Khaspuras for visitor information is a huge opportunity. The Jalal Khana was concreted somewhere in the 1970s because some international dignitary's car had to drive right up to the main gate. I would love to see that go. But in this sort of, there's a curious thing in India. We keep tarmacking our roads and tarmacking, and the road on either side of the Taj are now 2 feet higher than the gateway. So if you cleared the concrete out of the Jalal Khana, and you would have to restore the level outside the Taj. And you would then be able to see it much more in its incredible height. So yes, I would, to answer Naveen, I would love to see the Taj stories being told as they should be told. At the moment, whoever goes is in the hands of the creative tour guides.
We've got 1 minute left, and Amita, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful, wonderful session. And I hope everybody has enjoyed it as much as I, because you have cleared up a lot of misconceptions as well as made us fall in love with the Taj once again.
Thank you so much, Rana.
Thank
it's been
you
such
so
a pleasure.
much.
And we will go to the Taj together when all
Yes,
this is
inshallah.
Thank
Yes,
you
we
so
will.
much.
And Naveen, even I would like to see her as the DG. That would be really wonderful.
Thank you so much, Rana.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody saying thank you. We've got